The temple city of Varak groaned under its own weight, a labyrinth of forgotten gods and outdated plumbing. Tall spires, not one of them. Rilo Kesh, senior engineer and occasional hero, was knee-deep in what looked like a bad decision. His team had gathered around a crate of what was supposed to be food, a term they used very loosely out here in the void. "If that's dinner, I'm going on a diet," grumbled Torque, the team's resident pessimist, poking the contents with a screwdriver like it might explode. "Diet or suicide both sound like valid options right now," Rilo replied, squinting at the strange fungi oozing from the containers. It was purple, veiny, and pulsating in a way that screamed, "I'm not your average space snack." Rilo sighed. "All right, so who pissed off the food supply fairy?" Juno, the supply officer, frowned as she flipped through her digital clipboard. "The shipment was from the usual supplier, New Eden Foods, and last I checked, they weren't branching into Alien Gourmet." "Unless the marketing department's finally lost it," Rilo said. "Try our new alien fungus, it grows on you." Only the hum of distant machinery answered. Rilo knelt down and scraped a sample off with a sterilized rod, stuffing it into a testing vial. He'd learned from experience that if something looked this gross, it was either poisonous or a delicacy for some eldritch abomination. "You think it's edible?" Torque asked. "You volunteering?" Rilo shot back. Torque snorted. "I'd rather chew on my boots." "Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that," Rilo said, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. "Let's get this tested before someone gets creative and tries it in the soup." They trudged through the cramped corridors of the platform, the kind of place that made you miss the wide, open spaces of a prison cell. The lab wasn't much better, cluttered with gear that was obsolete when Rilo was still in diapers. Rilo set the sample into the analyzer, a creaky old beast that took its sweet time, like it had been programmed by the spirit of a tired bureaucrat. "So, what's your bet? Poison or pest?" Juno asked, leaning against a wall covered in colorful hazard posters that might as well have been art in this dump. "I'm going with pest," Rilo said, crossing his arms, "but with our luck it's probably both." The analyzer beeped, announcing it had finished mulling over its existential crisis long enough to give them an answer. Rilo pulled up the results, his eyes scanning the data. "Well, it's definitely alien," he said, "and bioengineered, tailored to humans, in fact." Torque threw up his hands. "Great. Just what we need, personalized alien fungi. I mean, who says the universe isn't looking out for us, huh? At least it's nice to know someone out there cares," Rilo said, tapping through the data. "Unfortunately, it's also highly addictive, like stop bathing and live in a swamp kind of addictive." Juno groaned. "Perfect. First it's the alien fungus, next it'll be some mutated space shrimp trying to sell us insurance." "I'd prefer the shrimp," Rilo said, rubbing his temples. "At least they don't mess with your brain." "We tell command about this?" Torque asked, not really wanting the answer. Rilo nodded, already dreading the endless chain of reports he'd have to fill out about the incident. "Yeah, we'll have to. Otherwise we'll be known as the platform that got high on alien fungus and crashed into Jupiter." "Catchy," Juno said dryly. They sat in the lab, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them harder than the artificial gravity field. Rilo looked at his team, a ragtag bunch of misfits that he'd somehow grown to tolerate, if not exactly love. "All right," he said. "Let's not panic just yet." "Not panicking is your job," Torque said. "Freaking out is mine." "Then you're doing great," Rilo replied with a grin. "For now, we keep this under wraps until we know more. Who knows, maybe we can sell it to the entertainment division as a new reality show, Addicted to Aliens." Juno chuckled, shaking her head. "Great, I can see the tagline now. Watch as they descend into madness, one bite at a time." They shared a laugh, and for a moment the grim reality of their situation seemed a little less suffocating. But as the laughter faded, the tension crept back in, wrapping around them like the cold, unfeeling metal of the platform they called home. Rilo looked at the sample again, its ominous presence a reminder of the secrets the universe held in its depths. "All right, folks," he said, his voice steady. "Let's get to work figuring out what the hell we're dealing with here." And so it began, the first step in a journey that promised to be as twisted and unpredictable as space itself. As the team dispersed to their respective tasks, Rilo couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something far bigger than a simple food contamination issue. Something told him this was just the beginning of a very long, very strange trip. And for once, he hoped he was wrong. "What do you mean, bioengineered and tailored to humans?" Aisha Morvan, the team's biologist with a penchant for asking the questions everyone else was too distracted to consider, had finally joined them in the lab. Her hair was tied back in a haphazard knot, suggesting she'd been knee-deep in something equally unpleasant before being roped into this fungal fiasco. Rilo shrugged, glancing at the analyzer's output. "The samples got more fingerprints than a crime scene. Someone somewhere tailored this for a discerning human palate." "Great," Aisha said, scratching her head. "They've turned us into the universe's guinea pigs. I always wanted to be part of a grand experiment. Not." Juno pulled a face as she eyed the contentious fungus. "If the universe is looking for feedback, I'd like to lodge a formal complaint." "Go ahead," Torque said. "File it under 'We didn't sign up for this crap.'" The lab felt smaller than usual, the air heavy with the kind of existential dread that accompanies the knowledge you might soon be a footnote in some cosmic experiment. Rilo leaned against a counter, arms folded, trying to look like he had a plan rather than a collection of mildly absurd ideas. "So, what's the play here?" Aisha asked, leaning over the sample like it might whisper the secrets of the universe if she stared hard enough. Rilo scratched his chin. "We need more data. Ideally without anyone sticking this stuff in their mouth and declaring it the new caviar. Isolate the compounds, figure out why it's so addictive," Aisha suggested, already starting to fiddle with the analyzer's settings. "Maybe it's laced with space cocaine." "Space cocaine," Juno laughed. "Is that a thing now?" "In this universe, anything's possible," Aisha replied dryly. Rilo watched them work, trying to ignore the nagging suspicion that this was all spiraling out of control faster than a caffeinated weasel. The platform's claustrophobic corridors didn't help, making him feel like he was trapped in a tin can slowly filling with water. "All right," he said, pushing off the counter. "I'll head to the comms room, let command know we've got a problem. They'll love this. In the meantime, we'll try not to let the fungus form a union and start demanding rights," Torque said, giving a mock salute. "Remember, no taste tests," Rilo warned, wagging a finger. "I don't need anyone going full zombie on me." Juno nodded. "We'll keep our cravings to ourselves." As Rilo left, he heard Aisha mutter something about bioengineering and ethical violations. He didn't envy her task. In the comms room, a space barely bigger than a broom closet, he punched up the connection to command, waiting as the system wheezed and groaned like an asthmatic dinosaur. When the image finally flickered to life, Rilo was greeted by Captain Drex, who always looked like he'd just bitten into a lemon soaked in vinegar. "Kesh," he grumbled. "What's the crisis this time?" Rilo gave a tight smile. "Oh, just the usual. Alien fungi, addictive properties, potential brain meltdown." Drex's eyes narrowed. "You're joking, right? I wish. We've got a shipment of personalized alien fungus that's more addictive than a teenage romance novel. We're trying to figure out the whys and wherefores, but it's a mess." The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, I'll notify the higher-ups. Keep me posted, and for God's sake, don't let anyone eat the damn stuff. Last thing we need is a narcotic panic in space." "Got it, Captain. We'll keep our tongues to ourselves." The screen blinked off, leaving Rilo alone with the hum of the platform's failing life support. He headed back to the lab, wondering if waking up with a hangover might be preferable to this. Inside, things seemed to be going well, if by well one meant no one had yet sprouted a third arm. Aisha waved him over. "We've isolated some of the compounds," she said, pointing at a screen filled with scrolling data. "It's definitely synthetic. There's a neurological component here that's sophisticated." "Sophisticated how?" Rilo asked, squinting at the display as if it might suddenly make sense. It's like someone took the best parts of chocolate, caffeine, and sheer human curiosity and mixed them all up into one irresistible package. Once you start, it's hard to stop, Torque snorted. So basically, they've made brain candy. Pretty much, Aisha said. But here's the kicker. It's got this compound that binds to pleasure receptors like a starved octopus. Comforting, Rilo said. Any sign of who might have sent this? Not yet, Aisha replied. But the biosignature is definitely not human. Rilo felt a prickle at the back of his neck, the kind that usually preceded someone getting thrown out of an airlock. You're saying it's an alien job, looks that way. Clever bastards. Juno glanced between them. Why us, though? We're just a mining platform. Not exactly at the top of anyone's list for world domination. Maybe that's the point, Rilo said, thinking out loud. A low-key test run somewhere isolated. If it works here, who knows where they'll try it next. Great. So we're the test subjects, Torque said. I knew the universe hated me. Join the club, Rilo replied. All right, we need to dig deeper. Try and find any trace elements that might point us to a source. As the team got to work, the atmosphere in the lab turned tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. Rilo paced, trying to ignore the itch of paranoia crawling up his spine. If someone was out there testing them, what was the end game? Iors dragged by, punctuated only by the clatter of equipment and the occasional curse as someone stubbed a toe on a forgotten piece of machinery. Finally, Aisha straightened up, rubbing her eyes. We've got something, she announced. What? Rilo asked, stepping over a tangle of cables. There's a secondary compound, a kind of marker. And it's got a signature that matches a known alien race, the Krell. Krell, Torque echoed, the word hanging in the air like a bad smell. The same Krell with a reputation for experimenting on anything that moves. That's them, Aisha confirmed. They're clever and they're ruthless. Rilo's gut twisted. So what now? We sit here and wait for them to come collect their data. Juno shook her head. We need a plan, and fast. If they've targeted us, who knows what they'll do next? Agreed, Rilo said. We need to figure out how to counteract the fungus's effects and then see if we can trace it back to its origin. And if they come calling? Torque asked, voice tinged with the kind of fatalism that suggested he'd already reserved his spot in a shallow grave. Then we make sure they get a warm welcome, Rilo said, trying for bravado. Preferably one that involves a lot of explosions. Aisha grinned. I like the sound of that. All right, Rilo said, rubbing his hands together. Let's get cracking. We've got a lot of work to do and not a lot of time to do it. As they settled into the rhythm of their tasks, Rilo couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. Sure, they were stuck on a mining platform with a shipment of mind-altering alien fungi and a probable alien conspiracy, but at least they'd figured out the players. And if there was one thing Rilo Kesh knew, it was how to play the odds, even when the universe seemed determined to stack the deck against him. Rilo Kesh returned to the lab, where the air was thick with the kind of tension that felt like the precursor to a really bad smell. The team was gathered around the analyzer, which beeped cheerfully, as if it weren't the harbinger of doom it actually was. So, what's the status? Rilo asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. In reality, he was about as stable as a three-legged chair on a bumpy road. Aisha looked up from the screen, dark circles under her eyes that hinted she'd been up longer than sanity allowed. Well, the fungus is spreading faster than bad gossip in a small town. It's already started affecting the crew's behavior. Great, Rilo said with a sigh. How long until we're all singing kumbaya and craving fungal smoothies? Not long, if the current trend continues, Aisha replied, her tone as dry as a desert. We've got crew members reporting cravings and exhibiting signs of withdrawal when they don't get their daily dose. And how's our favorite alien brain candy doing in the containment department? Torque asked, slouched in a chair with the kind of resignation typically reserved for long meetings and tax audits. Aisha shook her head. Not great. The containment measures were about as effective as a chocolate teapot. We've got spores spreading through the air ducts, and short of sealing the entire platform, we're running out of options. Rilo rubbed the back of his neck. Okay, so everyone's a potential addict. We've got an alien conspiracy and our containment plan is a flaming disaster. Sounds like a regular Tuesday. Juno, who had been silently observing while pretending to work, piped up. What about the Krell? Any chance they'll swing by and offer us a refund? Unlikely, Rilo replied. If anything, they'll probably swing by to see how their little experiment's going, and somehow I don't think they'd appreciate a customer complaint. I doubt their customer service is up to scratch, Torque muttered. Probably just zap you out an airlock for suggesting improvements. Lovely, Aisha said. So let's recap. We need to find a counteragent before the platform turns into a spaceborne rehab center or the Krell show up and decide to cut their losses. Exactly, Rilo nodded. So what's our plan? Aisha tapped a few keys on the analyzer, pulling up a new set of data. I've been working on isolating a possible counteragent. The problem is, the original compound is tailor-made. It's like trying to unbake a cake. Rilo leaned over, squinting at the screen. So you're saying it's complicated, like a soap opera, Aisha confirmed. But we might have a shot if we can synthesize a compound that blocks the pleasure receptors the fungus targets. Right? Because that sounds easy, Juno said, rolling her eyes. Why not just wish for a pony while we're at it? Rilo chuckled, despite the situation. Hey, this is space. Anything's possible, right? Except, winning, Torque added darkly. Or having a peaceful day, Juno chimed in. Or finding a decent cup of coffee. The conversation was interrupted by the sudden sound of the comm system crackling to life. An anxious voice echoed through the lab, barely distinguishable over the static. This is McKay in engineering. We've got crew members acting weird, real weird. Keep your eyes open. Rilo exchanged a look with the others. That's our cue. Let's move. They set off down the platform's narrow corridors, which seemed to stretch on forever in the dim lighting. The place usually smelled like engine grease and despair. Today, it was mingled with something unsettlingly sweet, like someone had spilled syrup down a garbage chute. As they entered the engineering bay, they found McKay, a wiry man with a permanent scowl and the kind of face that suggested he hadn't smiled since the last century. Took you long enough, he said, arms crossed. Sorry, Rilo replied. We were busy trying to stop the platform from turning into a funhouse. McKay grimaced. Yeah, well, you better do it quick. I've got crew members down here who look like they are auditioning for a zombie flick. How bad is it? Aisha asked, scanning the room. Bad, McKay replied, jerking a thumb towards the corner where a group of crew members were huddled together, whispering and occasionally glancing over with wild, hungry eyes. Juno cocked her head to the side. Well, they look friendly. Friendly like a pack of starving wolves, Torque muttered. Rilo approached cautiously, trying to avoid looking like a snack. Hey, folks, everything all right over here? One of the crew members, a burly man named Craig, looked up with a glazed expression. We were just talking about the fungus. Yeah, Rilo said, keeping his tone light. Any reason why you look like you're ready to gnaw on the furniture? Craig blinked slowly, as if processing the words through a fog. It's just. I can't stop thinking about it. The taste, the feeling. All right, how about we take a break from the mushroom talk, huh? Maybe focus on something a little less spore-y, Rilo suggested. Craig and his companions nodded, but Rilo could see the struggle in their eyes. The fungus had them by the brain, and it wasn't letting go without a fight. Rilo turned back to the others. We need to move fast. These folks are halfway to being full-blown addicts. If we don't find a solution soon, we're gonna have a riot on our hands. Aisha nodded. I'll head back to the lab, see if I can speed up the synthesis. We don't have much time. Good, Rilo said. And I'll try to keep everyone else from tearing this place apart. As Aisha headed back, Rilo set about organizing the remaining crew members, finding busy work to occupy their minds. But it was a temporary fix at best. The platform was a powder keg, and the fungus was the match. Hours passed with all the speed and grace of a drunken sloth, each minute stretching into an eternity. Rilo's attempts at distraction became increasingly desperate, ranging from impromptu card games to precariously stacked towers of empty crates. Got any threes? Juno asked, glancing at her cards with a frown. Go fish, Rilo replied, tossing another card onto the growing pile. Torque grunted from his spot against the wall. This is great and all, but unless those cards turn into an antidote, we're just rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. Hey, it's either this or we start a knitting circle, Rilo shot back. And I don't think anyone's got the patience for a scarf right now. Just when it seemed like nothing would break the monotony, Aisha burst into the room, face flushed with excitement. I've got it, Rilo leapt to his feet, cards scattering. You found the counteragent. I think so, Aisha said, holding up a vial filled with a fluorescent blue liquid. It should neutralize the compound without turning us into vegetables. Should, Juno echoed, raising an eyebrow. Not exactly the most reassuring word. Rilo took the vial, turning it in his hands. Well, we either try it or we start picking out wallpaper for the asylum. Anyone want to volunteer? The room fell silent, nobody eager to jump at the chance of becoming a guinea pig. Rilo could almost hear the gears turning in each of their heads, weighing the risks. All right, Rilo said, steeling himself. I guess it's up to me. Aisha hesitated. You sure about this, Rilo? We don't know what kind of side effects it might have. Better me than one of the crew, Rilo replied. Besides, I've always wanted to know what it's like to glow in the dark. With a deep breath, he downed the contents of the vial, the liquid burning a path down his throat. Instantly, he felt his body tense, muscles seizing in protest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a rush of heat spread through him like he'd swallowed a bonfire. His vision blurred, the room spinning wildly, and for an instant, he was sure the ground was about to leap up and introduce itself to his face. But just as quickly, the sensation passed, leaving him gasping for air but otherwise intact. Rilo? Aisha asked, her voice tinged with concern. You still with us? He nodded, taking a shaky breath. Yeah. Feels like I just got hit by a plasma bolt, but I'm good, Juno smirked. Congratulations. You're officially the first person to survive a self-imposed space drug detox. Well, it's not like I had much of a choice, Rilo said, managing a weak smile. Okay, let's get this stuff to the rest of the crew. Aisha set to work, preparing doses of the antidote for distribution. As she worked, Rilo couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope despite the chaos. Maybe they had a chance after all. With the antidote administered, they watched as the crew slowly began to return to their senses, the glazed looks fading, replaced by confusion and embarrassment. Craig approached, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Thanks, Rilo. I don't know what came over us. Rilo chuckled. Don't mention it. Just another day on the job, right? Right, Craig agreed, though his expression suggested he'd prefer a little less excitement in the future. As the crew began to regain their footing, Rilo gathered his team, the gravity of their situation settling heavily over them. All right, he said. We've bought ourselves some time, but we're not out of the woods yet. We need to figure out where this stuff came from and make sure it doesn't happen again. Aisha nodded. We still have the data on the Krell signature. If we can trace it back to its source, we might be able to stop them before they try this stunt somewhere else. Sounds like a plan, Juno said, crossing her arms. And maybe we can send them a little thank you note for the trouble. Preferably something that explodes, Torque added with a grin. Rilo felt a spark of determination flare to life, burning away the last vestiges of doubt. They were a ragtag bunch, stuck on a gas mining platform in the middle of nowhere, but they were fighters. And if the Krell thought they could use them as test subjects, they'd soon find out just how stubborn humans could be. Let's get to work, Rilo said, leading them back toward the lab. We've got a mystery to solve and some aliens to piss off. The lab was starting to feel more like an interrogation room than a place of scientific endeavor. Between the cloying smell of fungus that lingered like a bad souvenir and the blaring klaxon that seemed to punctuate every other minute, Rilo found himself longing for the relative calm of being shot at. Just as they were beginning to piece together their next move, a new interruption arrived in the form of a low, droning hum that vibrated through the platform. It was the kind of sound that made your teeth itch and left you wondering if you just stepped into the middle of a disaster movie. Please tell me that's not another reactor issue, Rilo groaned. Aisha punched a few buttons on her console, her face tight with concentration. Nope, this one's coming from outside. We've got company. Of course we do, Juno muttered. Why not throw an alien invasion into the mix? It's been too quiet around here anyway. Rilo shot her a look, but before he could say anything, the comm system crackled to life again. This time, the voice wasn't McKay's anxious twang. No, this voice was thick, oily, and far too calm given the circumstances. Attention, human crew, it began, with a condescension that suggested someone had just discovered they had a dodo problem in their living room. We represent the Krell Consortium. You are currently in possession of our property, a biological sample of significant value. Rilo exchanged a glance with Torque, who seemed more interested in his fingernails than the unfolding drama. Significant value, Torque echoed deadpan. They must have missed the bit where it turns people into snack-happy zombies. The voice continued, unfazed by their sarcasm. You are to cease all resistance and prepare for negotiation. Our vessel is approaching. You will comply, or we will be forced to take action. Great, Aisha said, rubbing her temples. What do you reckon take action means in Krell speak? Juno crossed her arms. Probably something involving lasers and us being less alive. Rilo leaned forward, speaking into the console with all the authority he could muster. This is Rilo Kesh, acting commander of this platform. We're open to negotiations, but I'd advise against action. The last thing you want in a delicate operation is a mess. Silence followed, the kind that settled in your gut like bad news. Then the voice returned, amused. Very well, Commander Rilo. Prepare a delegation. We will arrive shortly. The comm went dead, leaving an uncomfortable quiet behind. Rilo slumped back in his chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a lead blanket. So, Juno drawled, do we have a plan for when they show up, or are we winging it like usual? Rilo took a deep breath. Well, seeing as our options are limited, I say we hear what they have to offer. Maybe we can come out of this without anyone getting vaporized. Optimistic, Torque said, his voice dry as dust. But I've got 5 creds that say we're about to be screwed 6 ways from Sunday. You're on, Rilo replied, forcing a grin. But let's not cash in just yet. True to their word, the Krell vessel materialized on the platform's edge with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. It was sleek, silver, and disturbingly organic, like someone had grafted a spaceship to a killer whale. The boarding ramp unfurled with a serpentine grace, depositing 3 Krell onto the deck. They were tall, impossibly so, with opalescent skin that shimmered under the dim lighting. Rilo couldn't help but think of the last time he'd seen something so shiny. It had been a gift from his grandmother, and it had turned out to be a vase that shattered at the first touch. He hoped these aliens were slightly more robust. Their leader stepped forward, offering a nod that could have been interpreted as polite or maybe just condescending. I am Thalos, representative of the Krell Consortium. We come in peace. Right, Rilo said, not entirely convinced. So about this biological property, Thalos inclined his head. The fungus is a prototype designed for testing adaptability on human physiology. It was never meant to be released. Well, it's out now, Juno interjected, and it's not exactly making friends. We are prepared to offer a solution, Thalos said, ignoring her. A cure, if you will. In exchange, we require your assistance in harvesting a particular gas from the Jovian atmosphere, a gas that is difficult to obtain. Rilo's instincts went on high alert. Why us? I mean, surely a sophisticated bunch like you could manage a little gas extraction. Thalos's smile was thin. The area is unstable. Our technology struggles with the atmospheric pressure. Your mining platform is uniquely suited for the task. Aisha exchanged a look with Torque. And if we refuse, Thalos's expression didn't change. Then we will retrieve what is yours by force if necessary, and you will find yourselves without a cure. There it was. The ultimatum, as delicate as a brick through a window. Rilo weighed the options. On one hand, they had the Krell's promise of a cure, a chance to undo the mess they were in. On the other, they had the risk of destabilizing their platform, possibly getting themselves killed in the process. It was like choosing between a rock and a hard place, except the rock was a superheated gas that could leave you vaporized. "Give us a moment," Rilo said, motioning for his team to huddle up. It was time for a good old-fashioned team debate, the kind that usually ended with some degree of shouting. "Thoughts?" Rilo asked, keeping his voice low. Aisha was the first to speak. "It's a risk, but without the cure, we're dead anyway. And if we don't get this under control, the Krell might decide to take matters into their own hands." Torque shrugged. "Could be worse. We could be negotiating with the Gore and they have terrible breath." Juno fiddled with her calm, her face a mask of skepticism. "I don't like it. Feels like we're being used. But unless someone's got a better plan, I say we go for it." Rilo mulled it over, the weight of the decision settling like a heavy stone. He knew the risks, accepted them even, but that didn't make the choice any easier. "All right, we'll do it. But we set our terms." They turned back to Thalos, who was waiting with what Rilo assumed was a patient expression, though it was hard to tell with all the shimmering going on. "We'll harvest the gas," Rilo said, "but on our terms. We keep control of the platform and you provide the cure up front." Thalos considered this, glancing at his companions. "Agreed. We will provide the cure and you will deliver the gas. Cooperation benefits us both." With that, the Krell presented a small container, sleek and metallic like an alien Rubik's Cube. "The cure. Administer cautiously." Rilo accepted the container, feeling the weight of commitment settle into his bones. "You've got a deal." As the Krell departed, Rilo and his team were left with the task ahead. It was a gamble, but one they couldn't afford not to take. "Right," Rilo said, turning to his team. "Let's get this done and remind everyone why humans are the best at doing the impossible with nothing but duct tape and desperation." Their laughter was strained but genuine, a moment of levity in a tense situation. And in that moment, Rilo realized that no matter how dire things got, they would face it together. The team moved with a newfound purpose, the weight of uncertainty giving way to determination. There was work to be done, and they intended to see it through. In the end, it might not be about winning or losing, but about surviving together. As they made their way to the control room, Rilo felt the familiar hum of tension in the air. It was a dangerous game they were playing, but it was one they knew well enough. And while the stakes were higher than ever, the promise of a cure was worth the risk. "All right, folks," Rilo said, his voice steady. "Let's show these Krell what we're made of." With that, they dove into the task at hand, each of them driven by the same goal, to prove that when it came to survival, humans weren't just players on the field, they were the champions. Rilo Kesh rubbed his temples, feeling the throbbing headache that had been his constant companion since this whole fungus fiasco began. The lab, which already felt like an interrogation room, now also reeked of desperation and a hint of burnt toast, probably the aftermath of Torque's attempt to toast something on the console. When it came to multitasking, Torque was less double-edged sword and more butter knife. "All right," Rilo said, addressing the bedraggled half-zombies he affectionately called his crew. "We've got a snake's chance in a mongoose pit at synthesizing a counteragent with what we've got on hand." "And by on hand," Juno cut in, "you mean a bunch of half-broken equipment and a few old pizza boxes." "Exactly. It's like cooking a 5-star meal with a toaster and a can of dog food," Rilo replied, the sarcasm slipping into his voice as easily as a knife into a soft underbelly. Aisha, whose console was an island of calm amidst the chaos, looked up. "We might be able to repurpose some of the lab equipment. You know, before it all decides to explode or turn into a sentient being." Torque, who'd spent the last few minutes examining his fingernails with the intensity of a jeweler inspecting a diamond, finally contributed. "And if the equipment doesn't work, we can always ask the Krell if they have a user manual for their hate fungus. Or maybe we could just ask them to shut up and go away," Juno suggested, her voice dripping with irony. That always works in hostage negotiations. The platform shuddered, a gentle reminder that things were rapidly going from bad to worse. It was the kind of instability that made you nostalgic for the good old days of predictable structural failure. Rilo took a deep breath, focusing on maintaining the illusion of control. "All right, team, we need to focus. Aisha, see if you can whip up a miracle on that console. Torque, try not to break anything. Juno, keep an eye on the Krell. If they start looking twitchy, sound the alarm." "What alarm?" Torque asked, his eyes wide with innocence. "The one we dismantled to fix the coffee machine." "Yes, that one," Rilo replied, not even bothering to disguise his irritation. "Let's just pray we don't need it." With a plan as solid as a gelatin mold, the team split, everyone diving into their tasks with the grim determination of condemned prisoners. If salvation was going to come, it would be from their own hands, not that anyone was holding their breath. Aisha's fingers flew over her console, determination etched into her features. She was trying to piece together a formula from the fragmented data they had, data that looked more like a drunk toddler's coloring book than anything scientific. The challenge was akin to assembling a jigsaw puzzle in the dark while blindfolded and with half the pieces missing. "How's it going, Aisha?" Rilo asked, trying to infuse some optimism into his voice. He failed miserably. "Well, unless anyone here has a PhD in miracle work, we're pretty much screwed," Aisha replied. "But hey, on the bright side, I think I've identified a compound that smells slightly less toxic than the others." "Fantastic," Rilo said dryly. "I'll alert the media." Minutes ticked away like hours as they labored under the platform's flickering lights, each buzz of machinery a reminder of their dwindling chances. The Krell vessel loomed outside like a harbinger of doom, its sleek form a promise of the catastrophe lurking beneath the surface. "I'm not saying we're in trouble," Juno announced, pulling Rilo out of his thoughts. "But if that board over there was any more red, it'd be a communist propaganda poster." Rilo followed her gaze to the status board, which was indeed a sea of flashing red lights. "All part of the plan, Juno," he said with a tight smile. "If everything's broken, nothing else can break." "That's the spirit," Torque chimed in, his voice a study in cheerful resignation. "And if all else fails, we can always throw ourselves at the Krell and ask if they'd like some human in tree." "You'd make a better dessert, Torque," Juno quipped. "All fluff, no substance." "Hey," Torque protested, "I resent that. I have plenty of substance. It's just hiding behind all this charm." The banter was a thin veneer over the anxiety that coiled within each of them, a desperate attempt to distract from the ticking clock. But at least it was something. Several hours of feverish activity later, Aisha finally sighed, slumping back in her chair. "I've got something. It's not pretty and it might just blow us all to kingdom come, but it's better than nothing." Rilo's heart skipped a beat. "Define blow us all to kingdom come." "I mean, it's theoretically stable," Aisha replied, her voice laced with cautious optimism. "But then again, so was the Titanic." "Great. So we either cure the fungus or die trying." "How comforting," Juno said, rolling her eyes. "No pressure," Torque added with a grin that was more grimace. Rilo nodded, feeling the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. "Let's do it. We've come this far, no point in turning back now." They gathered around, each taking a small vial of the hastily synthesized counteragent. It was a gamble, like playing Russian roulette with an automatic, but they all knew the odds were better than doing nothing. "Bottoms up," Rilo said, raising his vial in mock salute. "To questionable science and even more questionable life choices." The liquid burned as it went down, a sensation like swallowing molten metal wrapped in barbed wire. But as they each coughed and spluttered, something shifted. The haze that had dulled their minds was lifting, clarity returning in painful increments. "Well," Juno said, blinking as if seeing for the first time, "I think it's working, or maybe I'm just hallucinating less." "Either way, it's an improvement," Torque responded, rubbing his temples. "I haven't felt this clear-headed since, well, ever." Aisha was already back at her console, her fingers a blur as she brought up the latest readings. "It's holding," she announced, relief seeping into her voice. "We're stabilizing." A cheer went up, ragged but real, a collective sigh of relief echoing in the lab like the aftermath of a storm. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough to give them hope. Rilo allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. They'd done it against all odds, but the platform was still teetering on the brink, and the Krell were still out there, a looming threat that they couldn't afford to ignore. "All right," he said, bringing them back to the harsh reality. "We've got a temporary fix, but we're not out of the woods yet. Let's get this gas for the Krell and put this nightmare behind us." "You know," Juno said as they moved to their stations, "I never thought I'd say this, but I actually miss the days when all we had to worry about was being shot at." "Me too," Rilo agreed, a small smile tugging at his lips. Life was simpler then, just bullets and blazes. With the fungus under control, at least for now, their focus shifted back to the original task, harvesting the volatile gas the Krell needed. It was a task fraught with peril, but they were committed now, no backing out. As Aisha manipulated the controls, the platform shuddered again, the machinery groaning in protest. "Easy, girl," Aisha murmured, as if coaxing a skittish animal. "Just a little longer." The console beeped, a cheerful sound that felt out of place amidst the tension. "We're in position," Aisha reported, "but the pressure's rising. If we don't get this right, we'll be spread thinner than butter on toast." "No pressure," Torque quipped. "Except the deadly kind." Rilo took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Let's do this." On my mark. They moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, each of them perfectly in sync for the first time in what felt like forever. The gas began to flow, and for a split second everything was right with the world. Then the alarm started shrieking, a discordant symphony that set their teeth on edge. "What's happening?" Rilo demanded, his voice barely audible over the din. "Pressure's spiking," Aisha shouted, her fingers flying over the controls in a desperate bid to stabilize the system. "We've got a leak in the main valve." "Of course we do," Juno muttered, her voice lost amidst the chaos. Rilo's mind raced, calculating their options. "Torque, get down there and see if you can patch it." "Juno, prep the emergency shutdown." "Aisha, keep us steady." With their roles assigned, they sprang into action, each of them driven by the same steely determination. Failure wasn't an option, not when they'd come this far. Torque raced through the corridors, his heart pounding in time with the alarms. The valve room was a mess of steam and flashing lights, the kind of place that screamed danger in a dozen different languages. "All right, you stubborn bastard," he muttered to the machinery, grabbing a wrench. "Let's see if we can't plug you up." The heat was intense, the pressure building to a crescendo that threatened to tear the platform apart. But Torque worked with the skill of someone who'd spent more time fixing broken things than breaking them. Back in the control room, Rilo watched the readings spike, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. "Come on, Torque," he murmured, willing his friend to succeed. Finally, there was a change. The pressure began to drop, the alarms quieting one by one. Torque's voice crackled over the comm, breathless but triumphant. "Leaks patched. We're good." A collective sigh of relief swept through the control room, the tension easing in a way that left them all feeling lightheaded. They'd done it against all odds. "Nice work, team," Rilo said, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "Now let's finish the job." The rest of the operation went smoothly, the gas flowing into the Krell tanks without further incident. They'd managed to pull off the impossible, and even the prospect of another Krell encounter couldn't dampen their spirits. As they gathered in the lab, Rilo surveyed his team, the ragtag group of misfits who'd somehow become family. "Well, that was almost too easy." "Don't jinx it," Aisha warned, though her smile was genuine for once. "Yeah," Juno agreed. "We still have to hand this over to the Krell, and I've got a feeling they're not the kind to send thank-you notes." With the gas secured and the crisis averted, at least temporarily, they prepared for the final showdown with their alien guests. It was a dangerous game, but after everything they'd been through, they were ready. "All right, folks," Rilo said, his voice laced with determination. "Let's go show these Krell what humans are made of." As they strode out to meet the Krell delegation, There was a sense of camaraderie and resolve that buoyed them, a promise that no matter what happened next, they'd face it together. And in the end, maybe that was all that mattered. With spirits high and a newfound sense of purpose, they stepped into the fray once more, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. After all, they were human, and if history had taught them anything, it was that humans were nothing if not survivors. Rilo Kesh stood in the lab, the air thick with tension and the lingering scent of burnt toast. Chaos had been a cruel, uninvited guest on their platform, and judging by the red flashing status board, it was planning to stay for dinner. "Well, Rilo," Juno drawled, leaning against a console that had seen better days, "your plan officially qualifies for a Darwin Award. If it fails any harder, it might just loop back around and succeed out of sheer embarrassment." Rilo rubbed his temples, cursing the persistent headache that had become his constant companion. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, Juno. I was going for Heroes of the Galaxy, but spectacular failure has a certain ring to it." "Just trying to keep things realistic," she quipped, her sarcasm razor-sharp. "We can't all be action heroes." The comm system crackled to life, Torque's voice cutting through with all the subtlety of a chainsaw in a library. "Hey, any chance we can get a refund on this plan? It's defective." "You're the one who suggested throwing yourself at the Krell as a distraction, Torque," Rilo shot back. "I think that qualifies as defective." Before Torque could retort with an undoubtedly colorful comment, Aisha Morvan cleared her throat, drawing the attention of the group. Her calm demeanor was a balm amidst their spiraling descent into chaos. "I've got something." The room went silent, all eyes on Aisha. She was perched at her console, the analyzer chirping its cheerful doom-laden tune. "I was sifting through the genetic data we've been collecting. There's a peculiar trait in our DNA, something the fungus doesn't seem to recognize." Juno arched an eyebrow. "Are you saying we're too weird for the fungus to eat?" Aisha gave a slight smile, her fingers dancing over the controls. "In a manner of speaking. It's like we're running an outdated operating system, and the fungus keeps crashing." "Finally, something good about being human," Torque chimed in, his grin wide. "We're incompatible with our own doom." Rilo stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "How does that help us?" Aisha turned the screen towards them, the data a baffling mess of numbers and graphs that might as well have been in Klingon for all he understood. "We might be able to tweak this trait to develop immunity, a new counteragent, one the fungus can't adapt to." There was a collective intake of breath, a flicker of hope that danced like a flame in the darkness. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but after the week they'd had, Rilo was ready to bet it all on a pair of twos. "So what you're saying," Juno said slowly, "is that we're so screwed up it might actually save us." Aisha nodded, her expression earnest. "If we can isolate the trait and amplify it, we might be able to stabilize the situation." Torque let out a low whistle. "That's great news. Maybe we can finally get a good night's sleep without worrying about waking up as a mushroom." "Just don't dream of mushroom risotto," Juno added dryly. "Or at least don't tell us about it." Rilo felt a spark of determination reigniting inside him, the embers fanned by the possibility of a solution. "All right, let's get to work. Aisha, you're in charge of the science part." "Juno, Torque, I need you to keep this platform from falling apart while we try to save our skins." "Piece of cake," Torque said, though the expression on his face was a mix of bravado and impending doom. "You keep us from getting fungus-brained, and we'll deal with the rest." Aisha dove into her work with a focus that bordered on obsession, her fingers moving with a precision that made the rest of them look like cavemen fumbling with fire. The hum of the machinery provided a comforting background noise, a reminder that amidst the chaos, there were still things they could control. Juno and Torque busied themselves with the multitude of tasks that came with keeping a gas mining platform operational. Juno had a knack for pointing out the obvious in a way that made everyone wish they hadn't noticed, and Torque was a master of applying just the right amount of force to fix, or occasionally break, whatever was in front of him. As the hours passed, the lab began to feel less like a prison and more like a battleground. Each beep of the digital clipboard a small victory, each successful stabilization a step forward. The Krell ship still hovered ominously outside, a constant reminder of the danger they faced, but with every moment they edged closer to a solution. Rilo found himself pacing, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of plans and contingencies. He stopped beside Aisha, watching as she manipulated the console with a deftness that made him wonder if she had an extra pair of hands hidden somewhere. "How's it looking?" he asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Aisha glanced up, her eyes tired but determined. "It's not pretty. But I think we've got something." "Define something," Rilo said, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. She pointed to a section of the screen, highlighting a series of numbers that might as well have been hieroglyphics to him. "See this sequence. It's unique to human DNA and it's not in the Krell's database. If we can modify the counteragent to mimic this trait, it might just work," Rilo finished, the weight of her words sinking in. "You think it'll hold?" Aisha shrugged, a gesture that was both reassuring and terrifying. "I guess we'll find out." "Fantastic," Rilo said, his voice a mix of sarcasm and genuine appreciation. "We're going to save the day by betting on the fact that humans are too messed up even for alien fungi." "Hey," Torque called from across the room, "I always said we'd save the universe with our charm and good looks. This is just the universe taking the scenic route." "More like the detour from hell," Juno muttered, but there was a glint in her eye that spoke of renewed resolve. Rilo nodded, feeling the pieces fall into place. "All right, team, let's make this happen." Aisha directed them, delegating tasks with the authority of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and wasn't afraid to tell them. Juno and Torque worked with a determination that bordered on reckless, their banter a constant presence that kept morale from sinking into the abyss. As the hours dragged on, fatigue set in, the kind that seeped into bones and made eyelids heavy. But through it all, the crew pressed on, their movements as synchronized as a ballet performed on the edge of a precipice. Finally, Aisha straightened, a triumphant smile breaking the exhaustion etched into her features. "We've got it." There was a moment of stunned silence, the reality of what they'd achieved sinking in. Then Torque let out a whoop of joy, Juno punched the air with victory, and Rilo allowed himself a rare grin. "All right," Rilo said, his voice carrying the weight of their success. "Let's see if this works." They gathered around the makeshift lab station, each of them holding a vial of the new counteragent. It was a moment heavy with expectation, the culmination of their efforts distilled into a few milliliters of liquid. "To questionable science," Rilo said, raising his vial, "and even more questionable humanity." The others echoed his toast with grins that bordered on manic, their eyes bright with the thrill of potential victory. As they downed the liquid, the familiar burn returned, but this time it was tempered with hope. Aisha watched the readings on her console, her fingers poised to act at the first sign of trouble. The tension in the room was palpable, a living thing that coiled around them, holding its breath. Then slowly the numbers began to change. It was subtle at first, a slight shift that seemed impossible given the magnitude of their task. But as the seconds ticked by, the changes grew more pronounced, a cascade of data that told the story of their success. "It's working," Aisha breathed, her voice filled with awe. The cheer that went up was loud enough to wake the dead, a ragged symphony of relief and triumph. They'd done it, against all odds. "We're stabilizing," Aisha continued, her excitement contagious. "The fungus is retreating." Rilo felt a weight lift from his shoulders, the crushing burden of impending doom replaced with the dazzling lightness of possibility. They'd fought the universe and won, and though the Krell ship still loomed outside, its threat was now a shadow instead of a storm. Juno clapped Rilo on the back, her grin wide enough to split her face. "Never doubted you for a second." "Liar," Rilo said, but he couldn't help the laugh that bubbled up, genuine and cathartic. Torque, ever the optimist, spread his arms wide. "So, what's next? World peace? Ending hunger?" A vacation where we don't nearly die. How about we start with getting the Krell off our backs? Rilo suggested, though the prospect didn't seem quite so daunting now. As they began preparations to meet with the Krell, there was a new energy in their steps, a camaraderie that had been forged in the crucible of crisis and emerged stronger for it. They were a team, a family, and together they'd face the impossible and come out the other side. "All right," Rilo said as they gathered one last time, "let's show these Krell what humans are really made of. Mostly bad decisions and sheer stubbornness," Juno quipped, but her smile was warm. "And don't forget the charm," Torque added, winking. Aisha rolled her eyes, though her expression was fond. "Let's just hope they appreciate our unique appeal." With that, they headed out to face the Krell, ready to negotiate, to argue, to fight if necessary. But whatever happened, they knew they'd face it together as a team. The future was uncertain, the path ahead fraught with danger, but Rilo felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were human, after all, and if history had taught them anything, it was that humans were survivors. And as they walked toward their waiting adversaries, Rilo couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally caught a break. Rilo Kesh rubbed his temples as he stared out at the Krell ship hovering ominously outside the viewport. It wasn't every day you found yourself negotiating with aliens who had the collective personality of a tax audit on a rainy day. And yet here they were, with a counteragent in hand and a plan to turn the tables. "All right, folks," Rilo said, turning back to his ragtag crew, who were looking as battered as a crew of spacefaring misfits could. "It's time to make the Krell realize that humans are more than just bipedal mushroom farms. More like two-legged inconveniences," Juno quipped, leaning against the console. Her sarcasm was as dependable as gravity and always welcome. "Yeah, well, here's hoping they don't see us as potential appetizers now," Torque added, checking a spanner for reasons only known to him. Aisha, the brains behind their last-minute miracle, was staring intently at the digital clipboard. "We've got to make them see we're indispensable. They can't just steamroll us into fungal oblivion." "Great," Rilo nodded. "No pressure then. Let's save humanity with charm, wit, and whatever the hell is in these vials." They made their way to the docking bay where the Krell were waiting, probably eager to discuss the finer points of human ingestion. The smell of the platform was still a delightful mix of burnt toast and wet dog, an olfactory assault that reminded Rilo just how far from Earth they were, and how desperate he'd become to survive this interstellar mess. As the crew assembled at the airlock, Rilo considered what to say. The Krell weren't known for their sense of humor or small talk. "We hit them with the facts," he said, "and hope they're not in the mood for a human buffet." The airlock hissed open, a sound that seemed to echo with impending doom, and revealed the Krell delegation on the other side. Tall, with skin that looked like crumpled aluminum foil, they stood like statues, unblinking, expressionless. Rilo wondered if they had even heard of an emotional range. "Greetings," Rilo said, trying for diplomatic but landing somewhere around cautiously sarcastic. "Let's cut to the chase. You've got a fungus, we've got a solution." The Krell's leader, a particularly shiny specimen who looked like he could use a good buffing, turned his attention to Aisha. "You believe you can counteract our fungus?" he asked, voice like a blender full of gravel. Aisha nodded, holding the vial like it was the Holy Grail. "We've isolated a trait in human DNA that your fungus can't adapt to. We've synthesized it into a counteragent that stops the infection in its tracks." Rilo stepped in, sensing an opening as wide as a Jovian canyon. "It seems your little fungus friend is on a gluten-free diet, and unfortunately for you, we're the bread." The Krell leader's metallic gaze didn't waver. "What do you propose?" "Simple," Rilo replied. "You leave us alone and we don't unleash our counteragent on your entire fungal operation. You need us to work these platforms, and we've got the upper hand now. Besides, I bet the galactic market's not fond of bioengineered spores in their fruit salad." The Krell delegation seemed to confer silently, their expressions, or lack thereof, not giving anything away. Rilo counted this as a win, At least they weren't vaporizing him yet. "You present a logical argument," the Krell leader said finally. "We will withdraw, but understand this is not a retreat. We will return prepared." Juno sighed theatrically. "Isn't that what all villains say right before the end credits?" Rilo shot her a look that was somewhere between appreciation and exasperation. "We'll be ready. Besides, have fun trying to get your spores past our outdated operating system." Torque leaned in, grinning. "Yeah, we're like that old software nobody updates but everyone depends on. Annoying as hell, but you can't quite live without us." The Krell leader gave what might have been a nod. Rilo wasn't certain, given the lack of neck, and turned to leave. "Your reprieve is temporary," he warned, before the delegation retreated to their ship. As the Krell airlock closed, Rilo let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, that went better than expected. Aisha was already back at the console, typing away. "We've got a lot of work ahead to make sure they don't come back with bigger guns. But we've got a plan now," Rilo said, trying to sound confident. "And a temporary truce is better than a permanent dirt nap." "Guess we're living to fight another day," Juno remarked, her eyes still fixed on the Krell ship as it powered up to leave. Torque clapped Rilo on the back, nearly sending him sprawling. "See, never doubted you for a second," Rilo snorted. "Good, because I doubted us enough for everyone." As the Krell ship vanished into the void, Rilo considered the next steps. They'd bought themselves some time, but the threat was far from gone. They needed to fortify their defenses, improve their counteragent, and perhaps find a way to turn the platform into something less akin to a fungus buffet. Still, there was a sense of camaraderie among the crew that hadn't been there before, forged in the crucible of crisis and all that jazz. Even if they were a bunch of misfits trying to navigate the galaxy's equivalent of a schoolyard bully, they were doing it together. Rilo turned to his crew, feeling a rare sense of optimism in the face of cosmic indifference. "All right, team, let's get to work. We've got a platform to secure, a counteragent to refine, and maybe, just maybe, a future to salvage." Aisha nodded, already lost in thought about the next steps. "There's a lot we can do with the data we've collected. Maybe even turn this counteragent into something more permanent." Juno gave a lazy salute. "I'll make sure the platform doesn't fall apart in the meantime. And I'll keep the Krell on their toes," Torque added. "Maybe set up a few surprises for their return." Rilo knew they were far from out of the woods, but they'd taken the first steps down a path that wasn't entirely paved with despair. "Let's show the galaxy what a bunch of stubborn humans can do." As they dispersed to their tasks, Rilo stood alone for a moment, staring at the stars beyond the viewport. It wasn't going to be easy, but then again, nothing worth doing ever was. They were out here on the frontier, a group of mismatched souls in a universe that didn't care whether they lived or died. But if there was one thing his ragtag crew had taught him, it was that they were far more resilient than they had any right to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Rilo shook off the contemplation and joined his crew. There was work to be done, and the universe could wait, at least for a little while. The platform was alive with a renewed energy, the crew's determination manifesting in every click of a keyboard, every turn of a wrench, and every sarcastic quip that echoed through the corridors. They were ready to face whatever came next, with a combination of ingenuity, stubbornness, and a healthy dose of irreverence. After all, they were human. And if history had taught them anything, it was that humans were damn hard to get rid of. The Jovian gas mining platform, smelling as if someone had set fire to a small zoo, was finally quieting down. Here in the aftermath of their interstellar scuffle with the Krell, Rilo Kesh found himself leaning against a wall, staring at the infinite void through a viewport. "Well, that was fun," Juno remarked, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she approached. "Nothing like a close encounter of the absurd kind to brighten your day," Rilo chuckled. "At least we didn't end up as the main course at the Krell buffet." She leaned next to him, arms crossed. "True. But now we've got a platform that's one power surge away from becoming the universe's largest toaster. Just our luck, Rilo muttered. We're still standing, though. Like a stubborn stain on the cosmic carpet, Juno added with a grin. Rilo turned his gaze back to the stars. You know, for a bunch of misfits, we did all right. All right, we nearly got turned into fungal fertilizer. Let's not start patting ourselves on the back just yet, Juno replied, though her eyes hinted at a shared sense of pride. Torque ambled over, his hands stained with grease, spanner tucked into his belt. Airlock's been patched up. Should hold unless the Krell decide to come back with a battering ram, which they probably will, Rilo said. It's like we're the universe's favorite chew toy. Everyone wants a bite, Torque shrugged. At least it keeps things interesting. Yeah, like a train wreck you can't look away from, Juno said. Speaking of which, where's Aisha? Still in the lab, Torque replied. She's obsessed with that counteragent. Thinks she can turn it into a miracle cure or something. Miracle cure, eh? Rilo mused. Wouldn't that be a nice change of pace? I'll believe it when it stops smelling like a barbecue gone wrong, Juno said, wrinkling her nose. Rilo sighed and pushed away from the wall. We should check on her. Make sure she hasn't glued herself to the equipment. The trio made their way through the cramped corridors, the platform's metallic symphony clanging around them, a reminder that even in space, nothing was ever quite silent. As they entered the lab, they found Aisha hunched over her digital clipboard, surrounded by a cacophony of beeping analyzers. Her eyes were glazed with focus, like a mad scientist on the brink of a breakthrough or a breakdown. You look like you could use a break, Rilo said, leaning in the doorway. Can't stop now, Aisha replied, not bothering to look up. This counteragent might just be our ticket to making sure the Krell don't see us as walking mushroom farms. Torque chuckled. Just make sure it doesn't blow up in your face. Got it under control, she said. Mostly. Juno raised an eyebrow. Mostly. Okay, so there's a small chance it could turn us all into amphibious life forms, but it's a calculated risk. Rilo smirked. As long as it's calculated. Aisha finally looked up, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. You know, for a bunch of spacefarers who were almost composted, we didn't do too bad. That's what I said, Rilo agreed. We've got some breathing room now. For how long? Aisha asked, the reality of their precarious situation not entirely lost on her. Long enough to regroup. Maybe even get some repairs done before the Krell come back wanting seconds, Torque said. Speaking of seconds, Juno said, eyeing the console, I'm starving. All this saving humanity has given me an appetite. Rilo couldn't help but laugh. We're still here. That's something to celebrate, right? Celebratory rations, Aisha offered deadpan. Yeah, because nothing says victory like rehydrated protein paste, Juno quipped. Rilo shook his head, feeling a rare lightness despite the gravity of their situation. All right, troops, let's refuel. We've got more work ahead and we can't do it on empty stomachs. As they made their way to the mess hall, the team inched closer together, a collective determination bolstering their steps. The platform might have been a ramshackle assembly of metal and wires, but it was theirs to defend, and they intended to do just that, one sarcastic comment at a time. The mess hall was as inviting as a tax audit, but they made do, settling in with trays of bland sustenance. The kind of meal that reminded you that flavor was a luxury and one they couldn't afford right now. So, Juno began between mouthfuls, what do you think the Krell will try next? Probably something with more teeth, Torque suggested, poking at his food with a fork as if it might bite back. Maybe they'll bring a bigger fungus, Aisha said, a shadow of humor in her voice. Rilo leaned back, contemplating the ceiling. We'll handle it. We've got the counteragent and we're not backing down. And when they do come back, Juno said with a wicked grin, we'll be ready with a surprise they won't see coming. Like what? Torque asked, curious. Well, I was thinking a nice welcome mat with the words "Try your luck" stitched on it, she said. Rilo chuckled. Only if we can rig it to detonate on command. The room filled with laughter, a sound as rare as it was genuine among them. It was in moments like these that Rilo found solace, a reminder that they weren't just a band of disparate souls thrown together by chance. They were a family, bound by shared struggles and a mutual disdain for cosmic bureaucracy. As the laughter died down, Aisha set her tray aside and fixed her gaze on Rilo. "You really think we can hold out here?" He met her eyes, seeing the same determination mirrored back at him. "We're human. We're stubborn, resourceful, and we adapt." "So yeah, I think we can hold out, even with the Krell breathing down our necks," Torque asked. "Especially then," Rilo said, "because if there's one thing humans excel at, it's making life hell for anyone who underestimates us." Juno raised her drink in a mock toast. "Here's to being the universe's biggest headache." "I'll drink to that," Torque said, tapping his cup against hers. Aisha gave a small nod, the weight of their shared responsibility settling on her shoulders. "We've got a lot of work ahead, but maybe we can turn this platform into something more than just a potential funeral pyre." "Hope so," Rilo agreed. "For now, let's focus on keeping it in one piece." The rest of the meal passed in relative silence, each of them lost in thought, contemplating the challenges that lay ahead. But beneath the surface there was a current of optimism, a rare commodity in their line of work. Once the dishes were cleared and the trays stacked, Rilo stood. "All right, team. We've got a platform to secure, a counteragent to refine, and maybe, just maybe, a future to salvage. Let's show the galaxy what a bunch of stubborn humans can do," Juno said, echoing his earlier sentiment with a wink. Torque and Aisha nodded, a renewed energy in their movements as they prepared to tackle their tasks. As they left the mess hall, Rilo glanced back at the empty room. It was a stark reminder of how much they still had to lose, but also of how much they had to gain. The platform was alive with a renewed vigor, the crew's determination manifesting in every click of a keyboard, every turn of a wrench, and every sarcastic quip that echoed through the corridors. They were ready to face whatever came next, with a combination of ingenuity, stubbornness, and a healthy dose of irreverence. Because if there was one thing Rilo had learned from this whole debacle, it was that they were far more resilient than they had any right to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Returning to the lab, Rilo found Aisha already deep into her work, lost in the maze of data and chemical equations. "Got everything you need?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, eyes bright with determination. "For now. But we're running low on critical supplies. We'll find a way to get what you need," Rilo assured her. "Even if we have to trade all my socks to get it," Aisha chuckled softly. "Your socks are worth that much." "In the right market, anything's possible," he replied with a shrug. She nodded, the smile fading as she turned back to her work. "I'll keep refining the counteragent. There's still a lot of variables to account for. And I'll make sure this platform doesn't fall apart," Juno called from across the room, where she was fiddling with a console. "As for me," Torque said, appearing with a fresh set of tools, "I'll make sure we've got defenses in place. The Krell won't catch us napping." Rilo watched them all with a sense of pride and gratitude. They were far from perfect, a ragtag crew of misfits and outcasts, but they were his crew, and together they were something altogether remarkable. "All right then," Rilo said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get to work. We've got a universe to annoy." With that, the team dispersed, each member set on their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose. In the face of cosmic indifference and alien threats, they stood resilient, a testament to the tenacity of the human spirit. Rilo lingered for a moment, taking in the sights and sounds of the platform around him. It was a far cry from the peace and stability he once dreamed of, but it was real, and it was his reality. He turned and joined his crew, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because in the end they were human, and if history had taught them anything, it was that humans were damn hard to get rid of. As they worked, a quiet determination settled over the team, each member driven by a singular goal: to ensure their survival, to outlast the Krell, and to carve out a future in this unforgiving galaxy. And maybe, just maybe, they'd be victorious.